everyone. Welcome to the Play Choices podcast, a podcast you hear. I'm your host, V. Welcome. So, today I'm actually going to be doing a solo choices chat, specifically in regards to the representation update that Pixelberry put out in June. So I'm going to be addressing the topic holistically. So this is just kind of a warning that I will bring up books as needed for examples, and there may be some spoilers. And of course, we're going to be talking about diversity. So obviously, it's a sensitive and touchy subject for many people, and if you're not super into that topic, you probably won't like this episode. So this is your warning, your forewarning, that's what we're going to be discussing for this episode. So in June, I mentioned on my Twitter, which, by the way, if you're not following me, it's at playchoicespodcast on Twitter, that I was going to do an episode specifically on the representation update, but that was going to take a little while because I did want to take my time with it. I didn't want to just shit out a thoughtless episode on a topic that I consider to be very genuinely important, and so I kind of wanted to digest the article, process it, come up with thoughts. So I do apologize for the wait, but I did want to take the time to feel like I was doing this properly. And ultimately, isn't diversity and representation always kind of a hot topic for choices? I always feel like this comes up, right? So I don't know if there really is such a thing as posting a late episode when it comes to this topic, but I guess in reference to the June update, it's going to be a little bit late. But I hope you all, those of you that are interested in listening to my thoughts and ramblings about this, will find it interesting. I do want to go ahead and preface here that I'm not necessarily here to defend Pixelberry like we addressed in the Q&A. I do not work for Pixelberry, even though a lot of people have that impression. I'm also not here to bash them. I would like to think that the goal of this podcast is to just fairly criticize Pixelberry when it's needed. At least I hope that's how that comes off, so that is my goal, is to find a realistic and fair middle ground for the company. I say that because I know obviously diversity and representation is a very important and sensitive subject for many people. And I don't know what anyone's expectations are for me in terms of producing this episode. I don't know if people are expecting me to be, very friendly and forgiving, or very, angry about it, which I am going to get passionate at certain points. I was writing down all of my thoughts and notes for the episode, and I kind of caught myself getting a little bit heated about certain things. So certainly you will hear me not necessarily speak about everything in a monotone voice, but I think that where I am is kind of this middle ground on the topic when it comes to Pixelberry. Is this middle ground of being there's still a lot of work to do, but I'm not necessarily up in PB's social media replies, right? Yelling at them about it. So take that for what you will. That's kind of the tone, at least what I anticipate it's going to become. I don't know for sure because I've only just started recording, so we're just going to see how it goes. So let's just start by going over kind of the content in the actual article that Pixelberry released. It was released on June 15th this year. If you actually haven't read the article, I will be posting a link to it in the episode notes on our Tumblr page, which is playchoicespodcast.tumblr.com. So if you haven't read it yet, then I will post that on Tumblr, just so everyone knows that we're working from, the same basis of knowledge, and that's what I'm responding to. So this article is signed by Oliver, who is the CEO of Pixelberry, so I'll just note that. I'll be reading excerpts where the article may use I pronouns, I think, at certain points. So when you hear those pronouns, this is coming from the voice of Oliver. I will also be shortening any excerpts that I take from the article for brevity, but I'll try my best not to misinterpret the article. I don't think that the quotes that I took are misinterpreting it at all, just kind of shortening them for the sake of saving my voice and also of saving you time. So I'll just start with the introduction of it. The article reads, last June, after realizing we were not doing enough to represent Black, Latinx, and other cultures fairly in our stories, we pledged to do better. We did not design our plan for just short-term solutions, but instead to make sustainable changes to how we work and think as a studio. So I think that this is important, and I'll for context, these pledges came to be during the summer of 2020, where specifically in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement surged again as news of George Floyd's murder. And as a result, many companies took pledges to expand their diversity efforts, and Pixelberry was, just one of many. I guess at a bare minimum, I can at least give, Pixelberry props for keeping this on their radar and giving us an official update, because, realistically, there were a lot of companies who really didn't do this despite making very similar pledges last year. I saw a lot of comments online of readers who were upset that the article primarily focused on racial and ethnic representation, even though the article is kind of like vaguely titled like the representation update, and it was also released during Pride Month, and we didn't get a ton of updates about their commitment to like sexuality or gender diversity in the books. I think a lot of people were just overall hoping to see some news related to expanding the representation for gender and sexuality. And I think those concerns are totally valid. They're definitely something that I wrote down in my notes to talk about. And I agree, of course, representation and diversity is expansive of more topics than just what someone's cultural or racial background is. But I do think it's important to kind of ground the context, that way we understand what the article is trying to address. They are specifically addressing the pledges that they made in the summer of 2020, which came up during a time where police brutality and the racial tensions that are irrevocably, kind of connected with police brutality were a very hot topic in the media. So I just think it's important to kind of ground ourselves in that their pledges were specifically relating to racial and ethnic diversity and representation, and that is why the article focuses so heavily on those specific types of representation. So the next excerpt from the article that I have reads that love interests that would have been white males are now customizable by race and often gender. Going forward, we'll continue to push this, offering both more customizable love interests in some books and a variety of love interests who are people of color and equally represented in terms of screen time and number of premium scenes in others. This is where it might get a little ranty for me. I'm gonna be honest. A lot of people were pretty annoyed by their mentioning of customizable allies as a solution to their diversity issue, which I'm gonna be honest, I'll raise my hand here. I was one of them. And I guess just like number one, customizable allies, I just find largely boring because they aren't really written to fit like any particular identity. But I also think the larger issue is that a customizable ally is just a band-aid on the diversity issue. I do think customizable allies are good to have in a book. I don't hate them. A lot of the times I end up romancing the customizable ally. This is not V taking a stance and saying, oh my god, I fucking hate customizable allies, do away with them forever. But in the article, it is marketed as a solution to representation when they really aren't. Number one, it is painfully obvious in the writing that the dialogue is written for a white male ally, and they don't really include much variation in the dialogue. There are a few exceptions, like in My First Two Loves, where Noah and MC could have different interactions with the police depending on their skin color, but overall, this is an incredibly rare example, and they just all feel the same to me. Like, it doesn't matter what ally, racial makeup, or gender you pick, they're all written the same, which for certain books can be okay. For other books, which I have examples, I find it very annoying. I think that Pixelberry would benefit a lot from having more kind of like unique dialogue coding for the customizable LIs in particular. It would be very nice if the writers would actually vary the dialogue depending on the different like options that you're given, whether it's like racial or gender specific, to add just a little bit of variety to the dialogue and to the relationship. And I hope that it wouldn't be seen as giving the writers too much work to add like an extra line of dialogue to customize an LI or an interaction a little bit more, because like I said, we've seen them do it before with My First Two Loves, so I know that they're capable of it. I would just like to see them push themselves a little bit more. The example that I'm thinking of in particular is the nanny affair. The nanny affair actually has quite a few instances where this bugs me, and I think I've discussed it in the podcast before, but one example of them not changing the dialogue in the first chapter of the nanny affair, because, you know, Sam can either be a man or a woman. You are given the option to customize their gender. And in the first chapter, Sam asks Anna how they should market a product to women, which makes no fucking sense. It really just grinds my gears, because if Sam is a woman, why wouldn't she have an opinion on how women want to be marketed to? Let's just ponder on that for a moment. The only answer to that question is that the dialogue was not customized for a woman character, which irritates the fuck out of me. And I have too many experiences with women in the office having a strong opinion to feel like it's realistic for the head of marketing at a company to not have an opinion about how it should be marketed to women, especially if that head of marketing is a woman. I'm not saying that it could never happen. I'm just saying that in my years of working, I've never seen it not happen. So that just felt very unrealistic to me, especially because the man that you're talking to in that dialogue scene asserts that, you know, women aren't into the science talk. They're not into that. And you have a character, Sam, who has background in robotics and coding, and you're trying to tell me, you're realistically trying to tell me that female Sam doesn't have some skin in the bone with that comment? They just let it slide? I mean, even with male Sam, I'm pissed off with them allowing that comment and just allowing the men in general in the nanny affair. Oh, we'll get into it. I have more examples. But just in general, allowing the men in the nanny affair to make that comment, but especially for a female Sam, it just triggers me. Like, the fact that Anna is the one who gets offended and not female Sam is boy, just one example of how they truly just did not customize Sam at all. And it just truly, and to me, in the context of this scenario, truly did not make any fucking sense. Another example, and this example is kind of all encompassing. I'm not going to refer to one scenario in particular, but obviously throughout the nanny affair, we come across a lot of misogynistic characters like Sophia's father or Sophia's brother, and they are very sexist in their dialogue, which is like designed to specifically trigger Anna and Sophia. And for Sam, regardless of their gender, they're automatically written as taking a supportive but ultimately neutral stance in the scene where these misogynistic characters are speaking. And they really only show support against sexism. They really only show support against sexism afterwards, like when they're talking to Anna, after Anna has confronted these misogynistic characters for what they've said. And it, again, another example where Sam is written to be a dude who doesn't feel like he needs to speak up in a business meeting where these comments are being made, but afterwards gets to run and play good guy to the women who actually stand up against that type of shit. And it just feels like if you're gonna write a female character, I'm sorry, let me correct that. They did not write a female character. they wrote a male character and then gave that character a female body and face. It just feels like if you're going to do that, please make them have a little bit more agency in scenes where they are literally dealing with misogyny. Now, in general, I think Sam's character could have been improved if Sam was the one taking the agency, since considering in those meetings, it seems like Sam has a lot more fucking power than Anna. The fact that Anna even has to be the one to stand up to them is quite frustrating. But especially when you're playing with a female Sam, it just doesn't make any sense to me why they wouldn't write that dialogue, other than the fact that they just did not consider it whatsoever. Because, I mean, let's be honest, out of the choices demographic, and especially out of the people who are choosing to play the nanny affair, how many people do you think are picking the female option? Probably not a lot. It's probably pretty low in comparison to the overall number of people who play choices. So they went, oh, okay, there's probably not a lot of people playing female Sam anyways. Who gives a fuck about customizing dialogue for her? And that is just one of the many shortcomings that I think a customizable ally has, which is why I take issue of them kind of representing it as a solution to their diversity issue, because it just isn't. Maybe in the future it can be if they're written differently, but at the moment I would not advertise that as a solution. There's a lot of work they need to put in before that can become the solution to their problems. Before we continue with the rest of the episode, I do want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, theories, or comments that you would like to be included in a future episode, please email us at playchoicespodcast@gmail.com. Make sure to specify whether you want to be shouted out or not, otherwise all emails will be anonymous. Questions can be related to books we've recorded episodes on, books that we haven't discussed yet, or even questions that you'd like to ask us. Alternatively, you can go to our Ask box on playchoicespodcast.tumblr.com and submit a question. Just specify that it's for the podcast and we'll be sure to include it. And back to our episode. Another critique that I have about the customizable LIs, like, I'm totally down for having one customizable LI in a book, and of course customizable LIs are still important in books where there is a single LI story like the Nanny Affair, but I will just say the customizable LI is usually the forced LI, the one that we are expected by the writers to spend the most time with, and it is so exhausting to constantly see the side character LIs, which tend to be people of color, just frequently pushed as side characters. They're side LIs. We're not expected to spend time with them. We're not expected to take diamond scenes with them. We are expected to take the diamond scenes with the customizable LIs. We very infrequently see a specifically person of color LI pushed to the screen, pushed to the forefront as much as we see these coded white male customizable LIs. And I would just like to see those LIs be just as essential, if not like more essential to the plot. It would be nice if they flipped the script and just gave more screen time to an LI that is a person of color rather than these white male coded LIs that are customizable. I also think it's just really important to emphasize that having specific LIs that aren't customizable but are still diverse is really important for being able to flesh out both their personality and their background, because those of us who aren't white and or male know that our identities do change the way that we respond to certain situations. So when you don't make different dialogue for the different appearances that your characters have, it can kind of dumb down the believability and the authenticity that we could get if you just put a little bit more effort into writing little minor, not even minor, they can be big, they can be small differences into the characters, which just make it a lot more relatable for those of us who do relate to the identities that the character has. Another thing that I feel like isn't properly addressed in the article as it relates to people of color is how often people of color characters are whitewashed. I personally feel like a lot of these especially the vaguely tan characters, have primarily Eurocentric features, and this tan skin tone is to let you know, like, hey, by the way, they ain't white. I don't know about you, listeners, bodyguards, choosers, whatever you want to call yourself, but I oftentimes think that these characters are supposed to be people of color, oftentimes look very whitewashed. I will caveat this with two things. Number one, people of color and any particular race are not a monolith, right? Like within each race, you're going to get variations of appearances because not every person in one particular race looks the same. So there are a lot of people who are people of color who aren't mixed with some sort of European or Caucasian background that do have Eurocentric features. And it's not necessarily that their features are stemming from them being part European at some point in their ancestry, but it's just, it just is what it is. It's just a feature that they have and they aren't particularly mixed, right? So that's not to say that every person who's a person of color who has Eurocentric features is white. That's definitely not what I'm trying to imply. There are people within every race who have very different facial features. I'm not trying to imply that anyone looks the same just because they're one race. And the second caveat that I will bring up is that, of course, some of these characters are mixed. And mixed people should be represented. I mean, both myself and Lucas are mixed. So trust me, like, we love the representation. We love it. But oftentimes, this whitewashing of characters comes across as them almost being, like, scared to represent a character that doesn't look vaguely like a white person. That's just the way that it comes off to me. And I'm sure that these Eurocentric looking people of color characters are also probably very convenient to them from an art perspective, because PB does always like to have at least one white parent for a lot of their characters. I think they largely do that to just reduce the amount of art that they have to make. Like, if they only have to make one parent a person of color, it's less work for the art team. But, like, bro, it's so lazy. It pisses me off. It pisses me off when they do that. Does PB know that, like, two parent households where they're both people of color, like, exist? Like, they know that, right? And, like, you can make the parents the same race. Like, representation of interracial relationships is great. But when that is fueled not by the intent to show an interracial relationship, but by the intent to reduce the amount of artwork for the character, for the book, it just bothers me. Like, it comes off like, I would bet money, like $5, not a lot of money, because I don't really care that much to prove my point, but I would bet a small amount of money that the reason that they do that is to save on artwork and not because they're, like, super passionate about representing interracial relationships, right? I feel like the majority of you are going to agree with me on that. That's my hunch. I guess the request for me is to add more characters. If you're going to add a character, like, makes a little bit of diversity in features, Give us some allies that don't have all of these Eurocentric features. And for the love of God, whenever you bring a parent figure into a book, don't be afraid to make both of the parents not white. I'm just saying. I also think there's something to be said about how we treat these canonically person of color characters. A few examples that are coming off the top of my head are Jackie from Open Heart, Ina from Foreign Affairs, Aurora from Open Heart. I mean, Aurora isn't an ally, sadly, but I will add her to the mix. I just feel like, and maybe I should call out specifically women of color characters, maybe that's more accurate with these examples. But I oftentimes feel like they're given these storylines where they are just villainized, and it just feels like the customizable coded white male allies don't necessarily go through that as often in plot lines. I don't know if it's like the writers know that they want to write an arc for a character who can also be seen as a villain, but they don't want to commit that to their customizable ally because they know that's the one they're going to force and the one that's most likely to get all the attention. So they push that onto the women of color ally just in order to have the arc exist. Like, they want to have the arc, they want the storyline, but they don't want their main ally to hurt from it. So instead they go, okay, this is the one least likely, to be picked based off of data. So then they pushed on to that person. I just feel like it gives the fan base a reason to hate the women of color allies, but like still love the forced ally. You know what I mean? The only book that I can really recall off the top of my head that took that risk with the main ally was Ride or Die. And I personally thought it was executed brilliantly. I don't think that twist really hurt the book in terms of success. I mean, I fully believe that Ride or Die was written to not be a sequel, and then based off of fan reception, they decided to make it a sequel. So with that theory that I have, I don't have any evidence. I just have a hunch. But with that theory, it would prove to me that Ride or Die was quite successful, even though they took that big risk with the main ally. So I would really like to see them take more risks and put that arc onto the main customizable ally rather than consistently pushing that onto the women of color allies. That's my request. All right, so believe it or not, I'm done ranting about that particular one. So let's move on to the next excerpt from the article. The next one that I have says, while we tried to scramble to make fixes, a few books that were outlined prior to June 2020 still have the legacy of unequal representation. Future releases will continue to build upon these improvements. Reading that, I just wonder if books like Open Heart 3 fit into this category. I mean, Open Heart 3 was a disaster for like a lot of reasons. And I guess I should preface before I say this that I have not played Open Heart 3, so all of the criticisms that I'm about to say come from just listening to the fan base and seeing how everybody reacted on social medias, because this book got flamed. I mean, people, I don't need to rehash it for y'all. Y'all know, if you were on social media and following choices at the time, that they were getting absolutely flamed for this book. And of course, like, Open Heart was a disaster for a lot of reasons, but I mean, I think the biggest complaint was the mess with the Eliza and Ethan. Again, I can only speak to this based on fan reactions of the book, but that seemed to be a really big driver of the dissatisfaction, if not, the main reason. I do want to give PB a little bit of leeway in this regard, because I just feel like a lot of people, and this might be the controversial take of the episode, but I feel like a lot of people don't understand how much time it takes to build these books. Businesses just do not move as fast as many people think that they do. Like, it takes a long time to make changes. And I'm sure that when these measures were put in place, a lot of the books were already in production. And I'm sure because of like crunch time and deadlines that it was hard to make changes to something already being created. So I can at least be a little bit sympathetic to PB in this regard, not specifically towards Open Heart. I can't defend Open Heart. I will not defend Open Heart, because that was a fucking mess. And even if that book was created prior to, all of these goals being set, Open Heart is a unique case. So please don't come at me in the comments being like, how could you defend Open Heart? I'm not defending Open Heart. I'm talking about other books that are being released, in the back half of 2020, during 2021, that don't reflect these statements. I do want to give them a little bit of leeway, because I am sure that trying to interrupt book production to meet all of these like new goals that they have is something that the teams were probably very hard pressed to do, and were probably given permission from some level in the company to be like, okay, do what you can if it doesn't push off the release of the book, Because I think that's another thing that's kind of hard that we have to take into consideration, is that what's happening right now is that Choices is not releasing a ton of books right now. And I see a lot of flame given to them on social media because of that. But then there's like, well, why isn't the book like this? Why don't you have more of this? And I'm totally with every one of you. Demand more representation for your gender, demand more representation for your sexuality, demand more representation of the things that you want to see in the book. I'm not against that. But I think it creates this interesting dilemma whenever people are demanding more things in a book, but also demanding for books to be released at a faster frequency. Does that make sense? I hope that that makes sense because the truth is that if something's already in production and then you have to go back and change a bunch of shit, you're kind of sacrificing the release date, which of course they have not only a commitment to their parent company but also to their readers and their fans to release books on the expected timeline. So it is a hard thing to juggle, and I do want to take the time to recognize that like that's a very difficult thing to balance. And actually, that may be the reason why things are slow, because they're having to go back and rewrite some of the books that they thought they would be, writing a certain way in the back half of 2020, and then the goals came out in June, and then they're like, all right, well, we gotta rewrite them, so this is going to take X amount more months. It's going to push off the release date X amount more months, right? So maybe that's a part of the reason why things are kind of slow right now, but I did just kind of want to give a little bit of credit. I'm going to give a little bit of credit because I, in general, don't think that I give PB a lot of credit in this, in at least the notes that I wrote. So I'll give them a little bit of credit. I'll give them a little crumb of credit. All right, let's move on. So the next excerpt that I pulled out says, more authentic and diverse hairstyles for people of color. Our team will focus on providing more authentic and representative hairstyles. We have 10 more styles in progress for various genders and will continue creating more over time. So in the article, they do insert images of some of the new hairstyles for their Black characters. Again, I'm not a Black person. I'm not the authority on whether these look appropriate, on whether these are good or bad, but I think they look great. And I think it's great that they're creating specific hairstyles for people of color and specifically Black people. I know that the topic of beauty for 4C hair types is one that is very difficult for many Black people, Black women in particular. And I know that representation in this realm is so important. So the more images, the more kind of hairstyles that they can create to further represent that hair texture, I think is amazing. I think it's going to be an appreciated gesture by a lot of people. And based off of the few comments that I was able to find, specifically touching on that portion of the article, it seemed like people were happy about the way that the hair looked. I think the primary criticism that I saw was, oh, it's just 10 hairstyles, which I don't know what is the number of hairstyles that would be appropriate for them to come up with. Like, I guess 10 in a year isn't a lot, Like, it's, now that I think about it, it's really not that much. It's really not that much. So they could be doing better. I will say, I think they could definitely be doing better in terms of the quantity of the hairstyles, but I didn't really see that many comments that were saying that the hairstyles looked bad. I personally thought they looked great. I thought they looked beautiful. So again, I think the fact that they're doing this is great. There's probably something to be said about the quantity, but those are really my thoughts on that part of the article. Okay, before we get on with the rest of the chapter, let me interrupt with some plugs. So you can leave us a voice message at anchor.fm/play-choices-podcast/message. It could show up in a future episode. You can also directly support this podcast at anchor.fm/play-choices-podcast/support. If we haven't convinced you yet, listen to this amazing, amazing commercial that Lucas and I put together for you.
In
It
the
takes me
arms
hours.
of an angel.
It takes me, no, keep singing. It takes me
I
hours to record. No, keep doing it.
Here
It takes me
are
hours to record and edit this podcast.
wherever you
And
are.
with your donation
I believe
of
that
$1 a
your
month
heart will
could save V from
go
smashing her fucking head into
on.
a wall.
Why does the heart
Thank you so
go?
much. And back to our episode. The next one says, we will create a program that gives more authority to people of color in the studio to advise writers and artists on more authentic portrayals in both writing and art of Black, brown, and minority characters. We are planning a studio-wide workshop. The intent of this workshop is to help everyone in the studio better understand systemic racism. Our writing leadership team is also looking at training sessions for our writers with a focus on exposing our writers to new ideas and cultural experiences that they might not have ever personally experienced in order to better understand our characters' perspectives. I will admit I have mixed feelings on this. On one hand, I think everyone should attend these trainings because I just think, even if you're not writing, like, no matter what your role is in the company, I think it's just good to educate yourself and make yourself a better person for, like, understanding systemic racism and, like, how we very intentionally got to this place as a country. Not even as a country, dude, just, like, at the world. How we got to this place with systemic racism intentionally. Because it is intentional. Racism didn't happen on accident. So I think it's good that we're educating our writers on this, but the other half of me is like, can't y'all just make sure you have people of color on your writing team? Is that too much to ask for? Like, I understand that most writing teams are going to have someone who can't relate to the character. Like, it's to be expected that if you have a set of diverse characters from various racial identities, there may be a writer writing for a character that just so happens they do not come from the same background as that character. And I get that's realistic. That's a very realistic scenario. So of course the education is important, but I also feel like there should be another goal of just making sure that we put someone who looks like the character and is like the character in the room. Like, obviously the program for people of color in the company to advise on writing is like a fantastic step, and I love that program, assuming that, you know, it's implemented well and implemented properly. I can't speak on execution though. I can only talk about, you know, what they're doing. I can't make any comments on whether it's going to be executed well. But the program is great. I think that's a great step. And they do speak on this later in the article. I have some other points whenever we get to that portion of the article, but I'll save my thoughts until then. The next excerpt of the article says, our writing team has created a sensitivity team to provide advice with more authentic portrayals of characters from underrepresented groups. The sensitivity team will also help with projects that deal with sensitive subject matters to course correct and educate when an element of the story might include something potentially problematic or insensitive. Taking on additional responsibilities like this is recognized during annual reviews. So this is a part I was referring to earlier. This part of the article just continues to expand on the effort for people to advise on stories mentioned in the prior paragraph that I read, which I think is great. I also loved how they mentioned that this is going to be brought up in annual reviews, because I mean, realistically, providing this type of guidance is a lot of emotional labor. Like, you're basically asking a person of an identity to explain what it's like to be in that identity, which can be very emotionally taxing on people. And also having to come to a team and tell them, like, hey, what you did is like problematic and insensitive and it needs to be rewritten. I mean, you're kind of coming to them with something that is obviously a sensitive topic, and having to provide that criticism in a professional work environment can be, again, very emotionally taxing. So I think it's fucking amazing that, you know, these people on these teams are getting recognized in their review, which I hope just, you know, translates into giving them appropriate credit, because I think we can all say that there's been quite a few instances where the writers fucked up and got it wrong and it didn't go well for Pixelberry. So obviously providing this education is so crucial, and I just really hope that, you know, people who are on this team and who are doing this type of emotional labor to benefit the image of the company are given the credit that they deserve. Those are my thoughts on that portion of the article. The next excerpt that I pulled says, more diverse book covers. The number of BIPOC, which I'm paraphrasing here. I'm paraphrasing that just so you know. On new book covers increased from 35% in 2019 to 60% in the first half of 2020. However, the number of Black characters is still not high enough this year. For 2021, the percentage of Black characters on covers will increase to 27%, which is up from 19% from previous years. I think this is a great call out. POC is this giant umbrella term, and I know that representation for certain groups, specifically Black people, can kind of get lost when you start looking at people of color and not necessarily breaking it out into, you know, different racial identities. So I love that they're pulling the group separately and analyzing it from that point of view. Now this is the part where I'm going to get ranty. Something that has always bugged me, even with like mediums outside of visual novels, I mean, we're talking about books, movies, TV shows, whatever, any type of medium that talks about diversity and the way that they market the story, is that and y'all, I know I'm not the only one who gets pissed off about this. Why do they always need to have at least one white character on the cover? Again, this is going to be me getting ranty, but I'm always bothered about how like every interracial couple ever is like one person of color and one white person. And I just have to ask, like, why? Why? Like every book cover where they have a person of color, whether it's like the LI or the MC on the book cover, always got to have one white person on it. And I'm like, why do y'all always see the white character on the cover as essential? And then you sprinkle in the person of color to be like, boom, there's some diversity. Bam, there goes your one black character on the cover. It just increased from 19 to 27%. Bam, that's where your increase is from. Like, I would love to see some covers that everyone on the cover, or even the majority of people on the cover, are people of color. As someone who identifies as a person of color myself, and this is getting a little bit personal, but as someone who also tends to date outside of my particular race, like, I've just always had this really icky feeling whenever I see that the only interracial couples that are advertised are a white person with a people of color. Like, it has just always sent the message to me that interracial couples are only palatable as long as one of them is white, which bothers me so fucking much. I guess to sum up this rant is that I would like to see more book covers. We can have multiple characters on the book cover as POC, especially for those that showcase a couple on the cover. Like, that would be nice to see more interracial relationships that aren't necessarily a person of color and then a white person. Because as a person of color myself, I typically tend to date other people of color that aren't necessarily fitting into my race in particular, and it's just always nice to see that kind of representation. Or another alternative is to show same race couples that aren't white. Like, how come? I mean, I'll take a gander through the app right now, but I cannot recall off the top of my head any books where they have like a couple where both people are black or Asian. Like, I just can't. I'm like looking at the covers right now. I don't think I've ever seen it before. I really don't think that I've ever seen it before. Now, I've seen two white people on the cover. It's hard to browse the cover on the app, so I'm going to give up on this endeavor. But it would just be nice to see more people of color on a cover, where not at least one of them has to be white. That's my takeaway from that rant. The next excerpt that I pulled says, people of color-led stories, we will very likely start this with a black-led cast story led by Chelsea, one of Pixelberry's black writers. I mean, y'all, I can't overstate how excited I am for this. I mean, I want, Chelsea and Chelsea's team to take their time, with the book. I don't want to rush them to release some information, but boy, oh boy, I'm so fucking excited. Because I think that Chelsea wrote the Elementalist in another book. Hold on. Okay, so I see that Chelsea was on the Elementalist 1 and 2, Bloodbound 1 and 2, It Lives in the Woods, The Freshman, and The Sophomore, all of which are books that I love. I just know Chelsea gonna hit this book out of the fucking park, y'all. I'm trying to be quiet because it is 1 a.m. as I'm recording this, because I'm toxic and I do not have a healthy sleep schedule for myself. But I'm so fucking excited. I think obviously this book, I mean, look at Chelsea's track record. This book is going to be fantastic. I'm so proud to Chelsea for championing this project. I'm proud of Chelsea's team for working on this. I'm so excited. I hope that this leads to more books focusing on like a black-led cast. I hope this leads to more books focusing on other underrepresented identities. Like I hope that this can lead to a book that's about like queer identities. I hope that we can get a main character that is like trans. Like I urge all of you, please, when this book comes out, please just show it as much proud and loud love on social media as you can, because this can only be good for the book. I hope that it helps. I hope that when it releases and when they see the positive attention that it's getting, that they continue to realize that they should continue to release more books with an all-black cast. I hope they release books with even more underrepresented identities. Like I'm so excited about the possibility that this could bring. So I beg y'all, I beg you, please, please throw all of your support behind this book. Like clearly Pixelberry pays attention to the people who spend diamonds, to the people who rant and rave about books on social media. Like please, please, please. And if you see a survey, get on there and rate that book highly whenever it releases, because we just need to throw all of our support as a fandom behind this book. I'm just damn excited. What you just heard is me slapping my desk because I'm so damn excited. So the next excerpt says we will increase the number of diverse writers, starting with hiring more Black and Latinx writers. Now they do also call out female writers later in the article, but I did want to note that even though it wasn't included in this particular quote, they also do call out female writers. We changed our hiring process to not require a professional writing credit to ensure that we are not enforcing the systemic biases of the literary world in our hiring for writers. We have promoted both more women and women of color into leadership positions. Now, again, I cannot comment on whether the things that Pixelberry claims to be implementing are being executed well. Whether something is being done and whether something is being done well are two very different topics, and I cannot comment on the execution of it. But assuming that Pixelberry is telling us the truth, and assuming that this is being executed well, I really can't criticize Pixelberry on this portion of the article. I can't speak to racism specifically in the literary community because I'm not in that community, but I do think it's amazing that they're taking a step back and realizing that their hiring standards could have restricted qualified, diverse applicants from applying. Like, I think that's great that they kind of did that internal reflecting and decided to move forward with that in HR. If I am recalling correctly, I do think that they specifically made a call for more Black and brown writers in like a recent hiring post they did like in the past like 6 months or so to apply for positions at Pixelberry, and I think that is amazing. If I recall correctly, I do think I reblogged that on my social medias to like let everybody know like, hey, shoot your shot please at Pixelberry. And the leadership portion is just so critical. I think sometimes when companies approach this initiative, they just hire people of color into roles, and let me tell you, just hiring people of color into roles isn't helpful if you don't have people that look like them in leadership roles. Because the truth is, you can hire as many people of color as you want in a company, but unless you have people in leadership making sure that it's a positive working environment for those people of color, especially if the people of color you're hiring is at, lower level employees, or if they're brand new to the company, it's just so important to make sure that you have representation at all levels. So that way they have someone they can kind of lean to, look to, when a difficult situation does arise at work. Now, of course, the hope is that there are no difficult situations, but I think everyone who is a person of color would agree that we've all had at least one, no matter how quote unquote positive or tolerant the workplace claim to be. It is nice to have someone you can look to and relate to that's higher up to help foster a positive and safe environment for these people. Because it's not just about hiring people, it's about making sure that the environment is safe for them too. Because if you just hire a bunch of people of color into a racist environment, that's not acceptable. That's not a win. That's a big loss in my book. So I think it's great that they're looking at the representation in leadership roles and looking at representation in multiple levels of the company, because that's really important too. There's also a portion of the article where they go into the donations that they've made to Black Girls Code, the Black Writers Collective, and the Latinx Writers Collective, and also provided some details to give some recognition to those groups and how Pixelberry is working with them. Which, of course, I mean, really, my kind of summary of my thoughts here is that it's just nice to see Pixelberry put their money where their mouth is. I think anytime we see a company talk about a particular cause, we also want to see them not only invest money but also time, and I think it's great that they provided the details and also gave like a place to showcase the work that those groups are doing, because that's so crucial. I can't say that enough. Alright, before we move on to the rest of the chapter, let me interrupt to plug our socials. We are at Playchoices Podcast on Instagram and at playchoicespod on Twitter. You can also go to playchoicespodcast.tumblr.com for a Tumblr page, which is where I post any episode notes that I have, like links to posts that I've mentioned, photos I've mentioned, or more. We're also available for listening on all major platforms, so if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please rate, review, and subscribe. It's a funky thing with the algorithm that helps us a lot. I wish I could explain it more in depth, but I just know that it helps us, so we do appreciate any reviews that you leave us. And as always, we are a growing podcast, so if you see us pop up on your socials, we do appreciate a share, a retweet, or a reblog, depending on the platform you see us on. We also appreciate it when you share our podcast with your fellow choices-loving friends. And now, back to the episode. So I will say that that's pretty much like the meat and the potatoes of the article, so let me talk about my wrap-up thoughts. I mean, change takes time, especially for companies. I know that it's super fucking frustrating to hear that, but in order to make sure that these things are being done, and specifically being done well, it is important to take your time and not rush projects when they encompass these type of goals. So knowing that, I can't really say that I'm surprised that some of these things don't seem to have come to fruition in the latest books. But I want to say that I don't want to diminish the importance of us pushing on Pixelberry respectfully to actually deliver on what they promised to us. I do want to say, of course, this type of shit takes time, but I don't want to say that as a way to try to dissuade people from making the request. Because I think the things that y'all are asking for, the things that I'm asking for, are fair. It's fair to demand more representation. I just think sometimes you kind of have to balance that, which, like, how realistically, how fast can Pixelberry move with this type of shit? Like, that's the thing that comes into my brain, is like the things that we're asking for versus how much time it takes is something that I struggle to kind of balance in my head. I think it would be fair to say that 2021 might be a bit of a transitional year where some of the books will show progress, maybe not as much progress as we want, but will show a little bit of progress, and others may not, just because of the timeline in which they were produced. And I honestly think by 2022, I think by that point, there's really no excuse for any lack of diversity in 2022 and onwards. And we as a fan base just need to, continue demanding representation and not just reading the article and being like, hey, Pixelberry said it was being done, so I just believe that. Like, again, I don't want if I sounded satisfied or approving at any of the portion of this article, it doesn't mean that I don't think that people should be pushing and demanding the things that they want in terms of representation. We shouldn't be satisfied unless the things are truly delivering on the things that we want to see. So I feel like I'm just going to start repeating myself, so I'll just end my thoughts on that particular point. There are also obviously plenty of other ways to show representation beyond race and ethnicity, which I feel like was a huge miss for this article. Again, I understand why, given the context and given the specific pledges that they made in 2020, but if you're going to call something a representation update, I do think it's fair for people to kind of be like, so where's the representation for these other things? So I will just mention, my thoughts about that here. I'll start with gender. I mean, I've mentioned this plenty of times. We need more options for gender of choice books. And I would also like to see more non-binary characters, whether they're allies, non-allies, the MC. I just think we need to add more of that. Now, I do think that gender choice books are becoming more common based off of the lineup from the upcoming books that they keep teasing in their Choices Insiders, which I'm very excited for. To touch on non-binary characters in particular, again, this is something I feel like I've spoken about on previous episodes, but to me, there isn't really an excuse to not, at the bare minimum, have they/them pronouns on every book. I think it's very little effort compared to other customization that they do for characters, and I would like to see some more androgynous body types and outfits. Now, plenty of non-binary people do look like your traditional idea of feminine or masculine, but there are also non-binary people that want to look more androgynous and aim to look more androgynous, so it'd be nice to have options that match that. I also feel like a lot of the non-binary people that I know in my life can pick a day or a time. Maybe they want to feel more feminine here. Maybe they want to look more masculine on this day. And so I think kind of being less restrictive about what type of clothes you can wear based off of your body type would be nice. Like, wouldn't it be nice to play a male character and like occasionally be given an outfit that feels like more feminine, or play a female character that can occasionally wear an outfit that's more masculine, or play a non-binary character who can look, whatever way they want, whether it's feminine, masculine, or androgynous? Wouldn't that be nice? Like, wouldn't y'all like to see that? I feel like I'd like to see that. So that is one thing that I think could be improved upon from a gender standpoint. Also, can we just get a non-binary love interest? Like, I want to date Ren from AME so badly. Can we please? I would also like to see more trans characters. Like, the last trans character that I can remember was in the Bachelorette Party book. It was a while ago. And I just think we need more canonically trans characters. Like, I would love to have that. I would even love to have an MC that's trans, because I know in the past sometimes they'll have dialogue options where you're having a conversation with the character and you can choose a dialogue option that defines a character's sexuality, and I always thought that was cool. I think maybe it would be cool if that came up, like, in a casual conversation with a side character where you can pick an option. It's like, yeah, I am trans, by the way. I feel like I've enjoyed the times where we could define our sexuality through conversation with a side character, so maybe gender can be a part of that discussion too. I would really appreciate just overall kind of more non-binary and trans representation in choices in general. And I am excited for the gender choice books that are in the lineup. I hope that that's something that they continue to push on, just having a male character as a choice. I hope that becomes the standard, because again, it seems like such a bare minimum effort kind of thing for me personally. Moving on to sexuality in particular, I have quite a few notes on this. My first note is just having more covers and marketing for queer couples in general. Like, I think I can literally count on one hand how many covers have a queer relationship on it. And it's not a lot. It's not a lot of them. And I just think, in your advertising on social media and creating your book covers, having more representation for people of different sexualities, again, it's something that seems so bare minimum, so low effort. It seems like it should be something that's easy to do, but for some reason we just haven't seen a lot of it yet. And obviously I think that's a huge improvement they could make. In addition to that, having more than one female ally per book would be very nice. I think also including the elementalist option of being able to pick your sexuality in the beginning of the book is awesome. And I would love to see that mechanic moving forward more frequently in other books. Again, I'm not sure how realistic that viewpoint is, because I don't think I've really seen that mechanic since the Elementalist, but boy oh boy would I be so excited to see it again on another book. My next point on sexuality that I don't think I personally have a lot of experience with, but I have seen other people complain about, is the fact that they write their 30 diamond scenes, is how they write their 30 diamond scenes for queer couples. I do admit that I primarily tend to play a female character with the male ally, so I'm definitely in the kind of cater to demographic when it comes to 30 diamond scenes. But I have heard from multiple fans that 30 diamond scenes for queer couples oftentimes feel lazy or just feel like they're written inaccurately, like having a vague description of the characters, like quote unquote pressing their hips together to symbolize sex, which may not necessarily be accurate based on the anatomy of the characters. It just seems obvious that the people who are writing these queer sex scenes have no idea how, like, these couples actually have sex or don't have any basis for what, like, realistic sex looks like between the characters. I know I've definitely run into this the few times that I have picked a scene with someone of the same gender. I don't really know what the solution is to that other than having more kind of like queer writers in the room, kind of like taking authority on writing a 30 diamond scene for these queer couples, because I've seen some examples and it's not great. I've seen some examples of these queer 30 diamond scenes and they're I think one really bad example I think was like the male MC from Open Heart with Bryce, and they like had a coding problem or a dialogue problem where they were trying to talk about one of the characters topping another, and it didn't make any sense the way that they had written it. So I definitely think that they need a little bit more assistance in the realm of what it is like to write a good sex scene for queer couples. My next point is just having more poly books. Please, I want to date multiple people. I want to be able to date multiple people. That was such a fun option. Like, I've been rewatching Perfect Match because of Martian Cat streams on Twitch. That's, by the way, a little plug for Martian Cat. It's twitch.tv/Martian Cat every Thursday. I want to say it's 7:30 EST. Cat has been replaying Perfect Match recently, and I do think that you are given the option, if I recall correctly from those replays, to be poly, and like, oh, isn't it so fun? Isn't it so fun not having to choose between people? Isn't that so fun? I love it, and I'd like to see it more often in the book. And my last point is having more asexual and aromantic characters. And MCs, not just characters, but also just MCs. Again, the whole thing with the elementalists of being able to pick whether you're asexual or aromantic was amazing. I'd like to see more of those identities written into side characters. I think it'd be great. I just think it'd be great to have more side characters and MCs that identify with that type of identity. Assuming they do it well. I know they don't do it well all the time, but let's just assume that all of my recommendations come with the assumption that it's going to be executed well. Let's just make that assumption. Another topic that I like to talk about is people with disabilities. The last character that I can recall kind of fitting into this category were like Elijah from Open Heart and Alma from Mother of the Year. I don't think that we get nearly enough representation of people who do have disabilities, and I would like to see it more often. Religious diversity is another thing that I wrote down. Really the only character that I can think of off the top of my head is Ahmed from Passport to Romance, and y'all, I know they fucked up this character so much. I know that. I know. I was here when they made those mistakes. I'm not saying he's a good example. In fact, he's an example of what they shouldn't do. But I would like to see more characters with different face. Like, we just don't really see that very often. And it's nice to be able to see these characters and like how they interact with the world. You know, is a little bit different from people who may not live their life so prescribed to a certain religious doctrine, right? And I think it's really interesting to see that representation, assuming that is done well. So I would like to see more religious diversity. The last thing that I want to touch on is body types. Why every LI got a six-pack, y'all? Could someone explain? You really want me to believe that these lawyers who are working 120-hour work weeks are ripped? They're just rippling with muscles. That's what you expect me to believe? I'm telling y'all, I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. We all know that whenever we inevitably get a shirtless Gabe scene, that he's just going to be toned like an Olympian, right? Like, we know that. Even though it's not realistic, that's what he's going to look like. I just want to see more plus size characters. I want to see more skinnier characters who aren't all like ripped and shit. Like, I just want to see like a skinny person without muscles. I want to see a plus size person. And also, let's get them some cute clothing. I feel like a lot of times whenever we see, especially plus size, I mean, this can apply to, you know, either a skinny or a plus size person, but I feel like especially when it comes to plus size characters in these apps, they give them like the most generic fucking clothing ever. And it's like, can we give them some cute clothing? Can we put a plus size person in a bikini? Can we put a plus size person in a crop top? Because I know a lot of plus size people who wear crop tops and wear bikinis. And it feels like oftentimes when we see these body types in media, they just want to put them in like a long dress, trying to hide their body shape. And I don't think that's how, I don't know about y'all, but the plus size people in my life don't live their life like that. They don't live their life trying to cover up every inch of skin. They aren't embarrassed of their body. They're proud of it. They're proud to show it off. So if we're going to put plus size characters in books, let's give them some cute clothing. Let's give them some crop tops. Let's give them some bikinis. Allow them to show that body off. So those are kind of all of my wrap up thoughts. I guess if I had to exit the episode on one last thing, if I had to exit the episode on a call to action, I think my request for everyone who's listening to the episode, to the fandom in general, if you do tend to fall into a favored demographic, if you are someone who tends to pick the male allies, if you are someone who tends to pick the female MCs, please, please, please be allies to other communities and push Pixelberry on representation. And this is including myself. I'm not excluding myself from this call to action, but I think a lot of the complacency with PB over the years is because they see that a lot of us are content with paying diamonds for the options that are given to us because they happen to fit our orientations. And that's all that they see. They don't see the people who are paying for the diamonds also demanding more representation. You know what I mean? They don't see those of us who oftentimes tend to fall into a favored demographic or a favored choice. They don't see us making these requests for other players who don't play the same way that we do, who don't want to play the same way that we do. And so I think my last kind of note on this episode is, if you do tend to fall into a favored demographic, please, please, please continue to push and advocate for the people who play this app who don't fall into that favored demographic, because, I mean, realistically, the reason why Pixelberry is in the spot where it is not 100% up to Pixelberry. A large portion of it is because a lot of the players of the app are complacent with what we've been given. And I do think that if we took a more, I don't know what the right word is, to be honest. I think if we took a more collective stand to demand and stand in solidarity with the other players who want things and who need representation that isn't being given to them right now, I think it would light more of a fire under Pixelberry's symbolic asses to create those things. So that will be the note, is just please be an ally when it comes to the players that are demanding things that maybe you don't necessarily need, but you know would make their experience a lot more enjoyable. And I'll leave off on that note. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to my rambling thoughts. I hope that they made sense to you. I hope that I said something that resonated with you or spoke to you. And of course, diversity is an ever-changing and ever-evolving topic. If there's anything that you want to chat about, drop it in the comments on YouTube. Hit me up on Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr. I also have an email, playchoicespodcast@gmail.com. Our Tumblr and our IG are both playchoicespodcast, and Twitter is @playchoicespod. Our YouTube channel is playchoicespodcast as well. You can leave a review on Apple Podcasts for us and rate us 5 stars. Let us know how you felt about this episode. Yeah, that's kind of where I'll sign off, because boy oh boy is my energy sapped after making this. So I hope y'all have a good day. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Saturday for our next episode. Bye.